Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Gamefromscratch, and today we're talking about the GDevelop game engine once again. I was talking about this a couple of months back because they released a mobile version both for Android and now out on iOS, and now they've taken another jump into a different direction, specifically another dimension. GDevelop is now a 3D game engine, but I gotta admit, it's a very basic 3D game engine at this point in time. They just did a release of 5.1.161, not the most exciting sounding release number, but the big thing here is you can now create 3D games using GDevelop. So you create 3D games, GDevelop, classic 2D games with 3D elements to full 3D games. This is only the beginning, and many more game engine and editor improvements will be released in the next GDevelop versions. And when they mean it is the beginning, it is the beginning. So the same intuitive interface you know and love remains, but the powerful new tools and capabilities at your fingertips. Design this 3D upgrade with the same principles that guided us in the development of the 2D game engine: simplicity, accessibility, and power. To get you started, we have prepared a set of examples we will walk you through. We're going to look at two of those, the racing game and the shooting gallery. There's also the Sokoban-like game. No idea what a Sokoban game is? Sure, you'll let me know in the comments down below. There is a video walking through what you can do in 3D here. So there is a 3D box object, which you can basically set up different facings of images on them. And then on top of that, there is the ability to create 3D graphical objects in the world. That's kind of it at this point in time. Also tools for moving camera, and then we got some things like for doing hit tests and so on in 3 dimensions. For those eager to start creating, the 3D upgrade is available starting today. Download the latest version of GDevelop and dive into the 3rd dimension. We are excited to see what amazing 3D worlds you will create, so gear up. It is time to take your creativity to a new dimension. And then we got a bunch of other little improvements in this release, such as the ability to copy and paste effects from one object to another, or behaviors from one object to another, drag and drop or copy and paste properties in the extension editor, and so on and so forth. We're not really about these other new changes. It's nice to see them. It's always nice to see improvements. But the big thing here, obviously, is that they've moved into 3D. Now, the tooling here, though, is still entirely 2D. Here is one of the 2 example games. This is the racing game. And you can see here, your level is actually created as a series of road segments. You can see them in action right here. If you've never used GDevelop before, it is a visual-based programming language. So you basically create the event graphs. It's a very simple engine to work with. Though I got to say, at least as it's implemented now, 3D isn't as intuitive as you might expect it to be. So let's go ahead. We'll preview how this works. Then we'll go ahead and check out the code behind it. So it's a simple 3D world. I think it's arrow keys. Yep. So it's a racing style game. You can bump into things, but you got to keep in mind that collision, for example, was actually 2D. So when I keep bumping this guy, I'm bumping him using a 2D collision mask, not a 3D collision there. So the 3D functionality in this engine is quite limited right now, but it is nice to see because this is definitely something we need more of. There's not a lot of easy-to-use 3D game engines out there, things that require no code. There's BuildBox, which I don't even know if that's still running or not. They've done such dumb things over at BuildBox that I haven't paid a lot of attention. There's Game Guru I've covered on this channel in the past, and not a lot more. So GDevelop moving into 3 dimensions could be pretty interesting. So how does this actually work? Well, each one of these pieces here, you'll notice if you go into it, so let's edit that guy right here. You can see, as I mentioned earlier on, everything can be thought of how it applies on a 3D cube. So this is being shown on the front face. That is the road texture that would ultimately go underneath you. And on top of that, you've got these 3 objects over here. These are 3D objects. So this, for example, is the player, and you can see here it is loaded with the 3D model GLB. So GLTF format model is applied here. There is no viewer or previewer of it at this point in time. So again, the 3D functionality is pretty beginner level here. This is the first baby steps going forward. You can see the behaviors it's got applied to it. So it's a car, and you can see it's got typical car controls, so maximum speed, maximum turn speed, and so on. So you can see how using this visual process, it can make it very simple to tweak values and effects. It's also got the shake model 3D feature built in here, and that's used in the events later on. And then there is speed path movement going on here. So when you go ahead and check out the code for this guy, you will see it sets up the path of your road like so. Here is creating the various different opponents. So again, we go back here, you're going to see You've got your black, white, green, blue, and yellow opponents all going on here. You see it's basically just creating each one at a different location, different starting position relative to the player. Create the finish line of the object, wait for the game to start. Once the game is started, control all your AI. So are you moving? Do you need to turn left? Do you need to turn right? And so on. And then here is all of the stuff handling your player movement controls. Collisions are done this way. They use a 2D hitbox to basically see if there is a 2D overlap between objects. So it is kind of faking that aspect of the 3D-ness. Here are the camera control aspects right there. You can now move a camera along the Z-axis, so that is definitely something required for 3D. And here is part of the shaking stuff here, and the shaking is actually done using that behavior that was attached to the car object. So that is one example. So we've got this 3D racing game. Again, your tooling is still very much 2D in focus. And then the other example here is a shooting gallery one. By the way, this is all, it's locally downloadable, but you can actually run it entirely in the browser as well. So everything we've seen so far has been running in the browser. As I mentioned really early on in the start of this video, there is also a mobile version now, so you can do this on Android or iOS, or I guess it's iPad. I'm not sure if it's iOS or iPad, but that functionality is there as well. So this guy is a little bit different of approach. You can see here, this is an old school shooting gallery type approach. So you kind of you move around in the scene, you shoot, and so on. So that is the second example. It is created using this, again, top-down level design type thing that is layered up. So when you look at these things, once again, they've all got that cube effect going on. So at the most basic level, you could think of everything as having like a six-sided cube, like a dice. Each side can have a different texture on it. So here is your front. Here is the left in this case. So depending on your orientation to it, you're going to get a different texture. It's very simple 3D at this point in time, but it enables you to draw the world using this kind of top-down 2D perspective and get a 3D rendition out of it. And then you see here again some 3D objects in the world. Our logic here is pretty straightforward again. Camera controls in the world. The big thing you probably want to be aware of is shooting. Shooting uses something called hit scanning. So you see it basically shoots a ray into the world, finds out if it hits anything. If it does, it spins the target around, gives you a score, and so on. So this is the programming approach to working with it. Again, you can see here, so you can move things along the Z-axis. So obviously that is required for being in 3D. But yeah, it's a very simple approach to 3D, but I'd like to see in time that they actually start have where you can create worlds out of, actual 3D objects, 3D tools, and so on. But again, baby steps. So this adds the 3D functionality, some of the new events in the world for handling 3D, things like cameras, and so on. And then you've got entities in the world with this kind of different facing, so depending on the angle that you're looking at it, you'll get a different texture out of it. Very primitive 3D, but again, baby steps. There's not a lot of game engines out there that make easy codeless 3D possible, so it will be interesting to see where GDevelop ultimately gets with this. And to celebrate the move into 3D, they are also having the GDevelop 3D Jam. I don't really cover game jams here on this channel, but I'll just mention this one because I happen to be covering it. So yeah, it's here. You got 9 days to create a 3D, 2.5D, or pseudo 3D game. There are some prizes available, etc. But it's mostly just for fun. So if you want to check out the new functionality, there is a game jam going on as well. So ladies and gentlemen, that is it. GDevelop is now a 3D game engine, or at least the beginnings of it. Very simple implementation right now, but hopefully it's baby steps towards a very easy to use 3D game engine in the future. Because like I said, there aren't a ton of really easy codeless 3D game engines out there. And so hopefully this works out for GDevelop. So let me know what you think. I'll talk to you all later. Goodbye.